Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the NSCAC Presents Behind the Bench. Today we have Andrew Latham, all the way from British Columbia. He's the head coach at the Lower Island Soccer Association, and he also has recently just become the regional director for British Columbia. Andrew, welcome. How are things?
Thank you, Valerio. Things are good. The weather is fine, and people are getting their vaccines here. So hopefully, come September time, we can get back on the field.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody's hoping for that. Same thing over here in Ontario. Today, our topic of discussion is the mentoring process. Andrew's got a presentation for us that'll go through using coaching mentorship to strengthen your club coaching programs. Andrew, before we start, give us a little bit of a background of yourself.
So I've been head coach with Lower Island coming up to 13 years here. So I was maybe hoping to get parole after 8 years, but it looks like I'm doing consecutive life sentences here. So I've been with Lower Island a long time. I also work for the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific, and I work with coaches there. I spend a lot of time working with coaches from other sports. Prior to being with Lower Island, I was in the Okanagan in Kelowna for 7 years with Kelowna United and the Central Okanagan Youth Soccer Association. And then I came to Canada 2001 after three and a half years with Sheffield United. Unfortunately, I'm a Sheffield Wednesday fan, so they were maybe the most difficult 3 years of my life. And prior to that, I'd worked in the US, so it was nice to come back to North America.
Perfect. Okay, so why don't you walk us through your presentation? If anybody has any questions or comments, please leave those in the chats or question component of the Zoom, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to obviously thank Valerio and NSCAC for giving me this opportunity to come along and talk to coaches, and then obviously thank you to everyone who's on the webinar today for taking the time out of the day to come and listen to me. So what I'd like to talk about for the next maybe 45 minutes and share with you is some thoughts I have around the mentoring process, and maybe talk about what is mentoring, some definitions of mentoring, what the research says about how we mentor people, who's involved in the process, what we understand about the mentorship process, the changes in mentorship and how that's changed historically, how we might identify mentors, some guidelines for mentorship, some tips for building trust, which is a key part of the mentorship process. And then maybe my personal experiences, I'd like to share one or two of those with you. And maybe if we have time at the end, hopefully one or two of you may want to share some of your experiences. And then I have some questions about mentoring, always thinking about this and trying to see if we can figure out how to make it a better process. So some of the different words we might use for a mentor, a coach, counsel, guide, lead, pilot, shepherd, all these types of words here. I did also have another one in here, which was that mentor is actually it's a small town in Pennsylvania with about 37,000 people in there. And I used to put this in this presentation. Nobody laughed at that. I thought it was pretty funny, so I've kind of taken that out. So in terms of definitions, so the Cambridge English Dictionary defines mentoring as the act or a process of helping and giving advice to a younger or less experienced person, especially in a job or at school. And I think that's a decent definition. But then I look at that and I think that if you can only give advice to a less experienced person, then what about these highly experienced coaches and highly successful coaches? So for example, if we looked at, say, Pep Guardiola in soccer or Bill Belichick in the NFL, I'm sure that they still have mentors. So that mentor pool for them would appear to be getting smaller. Business directory, because I think there's a lot of crossover between the sport world and the business world, and there are a lot of things that we can learn from the business world. So the business directory would call it an employee training system where a senior or more experienced individual, who is the mentor, is assigned to act as an advisor, counselor, or guide to a junior or trainee. So again, we're seeing that hierarchy of experience and maybe hierarchy of age. And the mentor is responsible for providing support and feedback to the individual on his or her change. So, what I get from those things is helping, support, advising, feedback, and experience. So when we look at research around mentoring, and there is a great amount of research out there about the mentoring process, not just in sport, but also in business. We see that in work from Bloom from 2013 that the key mentoring issue for coaches are who to receive mentorship from and how to get it, right? So it's not something that people may find easy to find, and I think there's a gap there in our sporting realm that we can fill, and certainly in our clubs and in our districts there's a gap there that we can fill, and that's what I want to talk about today. So work from Cram many years ago talks about 4 traditional phases that would be this initiation, cultivation, separation, and redefinition. So they've got that four areas there. Culver and Trudell and Gilbert, Gallimore and Trudell talk a lot about a community of practice, and that's a phrase that we use a lot in the Sports Institute, of trying to build this community of practice where coaches can share experiences and share, kind of war stories, if you like. And it is an informal type of practice that contains some elements of mentoring, and it also has great potential to impact learning. If we can learn from each other's mistakes, and maybe we don't repeat them as often. And then something here that sort of really resonated me from a number of researchers is that in research from the UK, they found that these informal bases of knowledge and ongoing interactions with peers, or maybe observing coaches and watching other coaches work during practices, are the most important facet of knowledge acquisition. And it makes me think a little bit about when I've been on coaching courses and have found them to be sometimes stressful, very, very challenging. There's a lot of testosterone in the air. There's a lot of people jockeying for position. And I'm not always sure if that's the greatest learning experience. And I certainly in a lot of the courses that I've been on, I've always found that the discussions with coaches after sessions and later on, or at breakfast or at lunch, those informal discussions are really where a lot of learning and a lot of sharing takes part. And we also know from other research that lots of coaches in lots of sports feel that way. It's not just just in soccer where we may feel that way, but these informal areas of knowledge acquisition and these are able to fill these learning gaps for us. So some of the components of successful mentorship then, and I've got a couple of slides here to kind of talk through with you. So there's the mentee and there's the mentor. Obviously, these are the two key players here. But some of the challenges that we might see are who manages this relationship, who is kind of driving the bus here, who's in charge here, and who sets the schedule. Because once we can figure out who's driving the relationship, then maybe we can start to get more from this relationship. So what we know about mentoring, is that it's a system of sort of semi-structured guidance, and it is mostly conducted in semi-formalized environments. There's no real formal way of mentoring. There may be some rules that we may want to put in place, but it's not easy to find a format or a way of doing this that fits everybody, because we're working with people, and as we know that when we work with people, everyone brings a slightly different context to the table. Everybody's bringing a little bit more experience, and everybody is is looking for different things out of that relationship. So there's no one size fits all here. So the mentor really needs to be readily accessible and prepared to offer help as the need arises. And obviously here, we need to make sure that we've got agreed bounds. I don't think it's fair to ask someone who's mentoring someone to be available 24/7 and all times of the day. So there needs to be some agreed bounds, but the mentor needs to be accessible as often as possible. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on when it comes to building trust, because that's a big part of building trust. So again, with mentoring, we see this as a chain for passing on, good practice or best practice. So the benefits can be widely spread. I mean, the hope is that if you're mentoring an individual coach, then maybe some of the wisdom and some of the information and experiences that you pass on to them, hopefully in turn they will be able to pass that on to to people that they may mentor as they become more experienced coaches. So it's hopefully it becomes a growing network and a growing chain of information. And it's really about sharing knowledge and experience. What we're trying to do is maybe share some previous failures, and the reason there is not to prevent coaches from making errors, but it's to try to provide a little bit of context for those coaches. If we go too far with mentoring and give all our information and all our tricks of the trade to the coach that we're working with, then all of a sudden maybe we're sort of cloning that coach, and that's something that I'll talk about shortly. So the idea here is not to develop a coach that never makes an error, because we learn from errors. We would say that to our players, and we have to be honest with ourselves as coaches and say that when we do make mistakes, the key is not to make that mistake again. So trying to share knowledge and experience, but always within a certain context. So mentoring can be a short-term arrangement. It can be a single issue that you're mentoring a coach with. So that could be over very quickly, or it can last many years. There's no real again, as it's informal, there's no real time limit on this. And then I think the key here is that mentoring is not counseling or therapy. One of the challenges, I think, for lots of us as coaches, it's very difficult for us to say no. When we're asked to do something, I think a lot of us feel we want to try to help, and we'll maybe sometimes we very often go, past the bounds that we set. But it's important here that we can maybe help with some discussions, but most of us are not counselors, and most of us are not therapists. We're just sports coaches. And when I say just sports coaches, I'm not trying to undermine what we do or undersell what we do. But our role here is to help them become better coaches. If they need counselling or therapy, then it's our role to push them in the right direction. But we have to realise where our expertise lies and where the boundaries of our expertise are. So the reason that I asked this question here, and I'll come back to this question later, is does every coach get to benefit from this type of relationship? So in this context, I guess I'm asking myself the question is, does every coach get an opportunity to be in a mentor-mentee relationship? And I think that's an important question that we should be asking ourselves, certainly within the club context, and certainly within the district context. Does every coach have the opportunity to become mentored? I know that we say, and I know that in the NCCP, National Coaching Certification Program, we would say that every athlete has the right to a qualified coach. And I think we need to take that a little bit further from a coach's perspective and say that, every coach, should be given the opportunity to improve and develop, and mentorship is a big part of that in my opinion. So it's a little bit more than just giving advice. It's not really just about talking about, how many players you would play in midfield against this particular system, or where you would put your cones down, or how many channels you might set up in a practice. It's not really about that giving advice. It's about passing on experiences in those particular areas and in those particular situations. So it's a little bit more than just giving someone advice on how to develop a training session. So it's really about motivating and empowering the other person to identify their issues and their goals, and how we can get them to achieve those goals. And I'll talk to that again a little bit later here. So again, in terms of trying to motivate and empower them, it's not our job to do it for them, and we should not be expecting them to do it the way that we did it. But it's about understanding and respecting different ways of working, and the different contexts that these coaches may find themselves in as they're starting on those first steps of their coaching journey. I do think certainly in the time that I've coached, and I'm sure a lot of you feel the same way, that the athletes are different. The athletes have changed. Maybe it might be a blanket statement to say that maybe there's not as much intrinsic drive for them, and certainly with some that is the case, and so there's maybe not as much self-starting. So there are different strategies that coaches that we're having to use now that maybe we didn't have to use 10, 15, 17 years ago. So we need to recognize, if we're mentoring coaches that are just taking their first steps into coaching, that it is a different landscape. The player, the athlete, the customer is different, and they need to be motivated slightly differently, and they need to be taught about goal setting and part of a team in maybe slightly different ways than we may have done this 10 or 15 years ago. So coaching has certainly changed. So our approach to mentorship needs to take that into consideration. And then one of the things that I've seen from time to time, and almost as a coach myself, as a young coach myself, being mentored, we're not trying to make clones of ourselves here. And if mentoring does become cloning, then it fails. The idea here is not to be like Dr. Evil and making all these little mini-me's around the place. The idea here is to try to make the coach that you're working become their best self, the best coach that they can be, and not really a carbon copy of you. It benefits no one if I go around and start mentoring coaches and make them all Andrew Lathams. There's enough Andrew Lathams in this world. There don't need to be more of them. So I think this is really an important part of the piece here. And I think that as coaches, when we're mentoring younger coaches, if we start to see some of the behaviors that we maybe exhibit, if we start to see these in these coaches, then we need to maybe put a little bit of a check on ourselves and make sure that we're not producing a carbon copy of you as a coach. So I wanted to talk a little bit about changes in mentorship, and maybe this might be something we can discuss at the end here. So certainly for myself, I back in England, when I was starting to coach, mid 80s, late 80s, early 90s, at that time you kind of found your own mentors, and it would be possibly older teammates or previous coaches, or sometimes it would be your first coach. So it was a lot more it came together more organically, and obviously in these instances those relationships are already formed. So there's some real benefits to that style of sort of finding mentorship and people partnering and pairing up together. What we find now, and certainly in some of the coaching programs that I've been involved in, certainly with the Canadian Sports Institute around the Advanced Coaching Diploma, we pair coaches, the mentor and the mentees up together. So it's obviously a little bit less organic, and it's more manufactured. And I've had some experiences in the Advanced Coaching Diploma, and I also do some mentoring in the UBC High Performance program. And sometimes there's some gaps in those relationships, and it can be challenging. And I always kind of wonder myself, does this new way of building these relationships, does it provide the same results as this older self-selected historical style? Certainly in this historical style, there was as I said, there was a relationship there previously built. So there's things to build on, and that sometimes would maybe, I think would sort of improve that. At the same time, it may have brought some baggage along. So I think the question that I would ask later is this a better way of doing things, or is that older style better? What are the pros and cons of those two different styles there? So I think the key challenge for us all within our programs is, how do we identify mentors? What are the characteristics that would make a coach a really good mentor? So certainly they have to be experienced, and I recognize that not all experienced coaches are good coaches, but I think most good coaches have got a level of experience. So I think it's sometimes can be a loaded word when you say, you've got to be experienced to do this, and you could look at counter arguments and say that there's a lot of younger coaches around now that we may not think are experienced, but when we look into their background, even though they've only been in the forefront for a few years, we see that they started coaching very early. I mean, if I think of some of the younger coaches that are having some success in the UK, I think if we look at maybe Graham Potter at Brighton, he finished playing quite early and took up coaching quite early. If we look at the Cowley brothers that were successful at Lincoln and have recently just finished a stint at Portsmouth, if you listen to their story, they started coaching very, very early, mid-20s, late 20s. They were focused on coaching. So I think experience is the key, but you don't have to be old to be experienced. Obviously, the mentor's got to be committed to a time period. It's I kind of would suggest that mentoring is similar to volunteering, and again, in our clubs, we know how difficult it is to get volunteers. So I think it's key to make sure that the mentor's committed to a time period, and even if that is only 4 weeks or 6 weeks, I still think there's some value to that. They've really got to be prepared to share their experiences, some of the wins that they've had, and some of the losses that they've had, and some of the things that have worked for them. So they've got to be that type of coach that's prepared to share their experiences. They have to be collaborative, and as part of being collaborative, it's important that they're sometimes prepared to be ignored a little bit. Not all the advice that we would give is going to be taken. They've got to be what I would call a pusher and a puller. They've got to know when to, push home a point that they feel is important, and sometimes got to know when to let something go where maybe you're not able to make that connection. And then they'll also have to be accepting that not everything that you say is going to be taken on board. Not everything you say is going to be, agreed with. I was on a call last week where we were talking about mentoring, and we were, discussing coaches that weren't in what we call the learner mindset. And one of the things that another person on the call said is, you can tell when someone's not ready to learn because they say, yeah, but quite a lot. So we have to be accepting that not all coaches are ready to learn all of the time. They may fall in and out of that mindset. You've got to be a really good listener, because sometimes it might just be the coach wants to vent or wants to have a little bit of a moan and a groan. As coaches, we all like to have a little bit of a moan and a groan at times. So it's really important that these people that we identify as mentors are able to listen and are prepared to let the other person drive the conversation. So a few guidelines for mentorship then here. So I guess I would always ask myself a question: is it just a transactional relationship? Is it just a short amount of time where two people are together, and I'm prepared to give you some information, and you would be prepared to take on that information? And at a certain level, it isn't just a simple transactional relationship. The key is to try to build that relationship. Getting to know the mentee will obviously help the relationship. And again, talking about a little bit later about building trust, one of the ways that we can do that is to find uncommon ground. Certainly within our sport, we will all find lots of things to talk about, lots of things to disagree about, lots of things to agree around. But one of the things that I've found to be useful is to try to find something, some interest that you might share with a coach away from soccer or away from sport, because that's another way of maybe trying to connect with the coach that you're working with. And it can't always be business. There has got to be a little bit of time for light-hearted discussion and other things within the relationship. So it's important to identify the knowledge gaps or the experience gaps that the coaches that you're working with. And then one of the things there, I think, is to get them to do a gap analysis, maybe a gap analysis of their coaching, where they are now, maybe where they would like to be in 5 years, where they would like to be in 15 years, and what are the steps that are going to take them on that path, and maybe get them to identify what their dream job is, where they want to be. The key then is to work to earn trust and respect, and of course that's easy to say. And how do we do this? And I'll share a few thoughts and ideas around that shortly. But really, the most important thing, in my experience here, in terms of working with coaches, not just in soccer but across other sports, is the key is to really listen to them. Because if you listen to them and give them time to speak, they'll give you the tools that you need to do your job with them in terms of them, sharing some of their experiences and some of their lack of experiences. So again, I think the key here is being a good listener, and again, as I said a few seconds ago, is being prepared to let the other person drive the discussion. And drive the relationship at times. So it's also important to understand there are two different perspectives in the relationship. We all see things slightly differently. We all come from different backgrounds. We all bring a different context to the table. Once you've been able to get the mentee to do this gap analysis, then we start to look to get them to set goals, as we would do. If we're coaches working with players and teams, we would ask our teams and our players to set goals. We should be asking our coaches to set those goals as well, and then we can start working with them to build a plan to achieve these goals. So although I talked earlier about mentorship being very informal, we need to start to take responsibility here and set up a schedule for meeting, whether that's once a week, whether that's once every 2 weeks. I think it's important to plan ahead and set up a schedule, a meeting schedule, so there's something that's coming down the pipe. If it's too informal and there's no next meeting planned, then the relationship and the mentorship can fall apart there. also important to recap the discussion and set action items. I was thinking about this morning, and I feel I've been married 25, 26 years, and I always recap the discussion with my wife to make sure that I've heard what she's told me. And there's a little bit of joking in there, but I do think it's important, just before the end of a meeting, that you're able to sit down with people and make sure that they have heard what you have said and you have heard what they have said, because we can very often go off in two different directions and waste time and waste energy. So I think it's really important to recap the discussion and set some action items in place for the next meeting, and then try to move the relationship out of the formal and into the informal, where I've talked here about a lot of things that you may recognize from board meetings or from team meetings. We're talking about schedules and achieving goals and recapping. But even though we want to put some formalities into this, the real benefit, the real work, and the real sharing of information, I think, does come in that informal setting, whether that's a cup of coffee or whether that's a walk around the park or whether that's a discussion after a training session. So although I think there are some things we can put in there to formalize the relationship, I think the bread and butter of it, the discussions and the talking, needs to be in kind of that informal setting. So in terms of building trust, and again, I was able to pick up a few of these little gems from other coaches that I've been able to have the opportunity to work with. If this relationship's going to work, it's the same as any relationship. Trust is a key component. So, I mean, how do you build trust? As I said earlier, it's so easy to say, but it's so difficult to do. And a couple of things that I have picked up from other people, and again, I'd love to say that these were my ideas, but they're not. But I really think that something simple as sharing a failure with the coach that you're working with really goes a long way to start to build that trust, because by doing that, you're sort of showing that you're not this coach that knows everything and has never made a mistake. And you're also showing maybe a little bit of vulnerability. And I think when we're prepared to do that with each other, then we're starting to drop that guard a little bit, and we're starting to show people that we're talking to that we want to trust them and we want to work with them. And I also think when we're working with younger coaches, it's important for us to share some of these failures with them, so that they understand that they're not going to get everything right. As we know, coaches make errors. And the better coaches are the ones that learn from those errors, as it is the same with athletes. And then in terms of research, it tells us three keys to building trust. And the first one is being there for the coach. So I talked about that a little bit earlier, about coaches being available to talk and being available to support. And so being there for the coach is certainly one of those keys. The next one is creating positive experiences. So trying to make sure that every interaction that you have is a positive for the coach. Even when you're talking about difficult things, that there's still a way to turn that around into a positive experience. And then finally, it's the frequency of these experiences, making sure that you're in touch maybe once a week if that's possible, or once every other week if that's possible, and sometimes even if that's only for 10 minutes. But it's that frequency of these positive experiences that will start to build a little bit of trust. And obviously, as trust builds through the relationship, then the relationship starts to grow and develop. And I think what I have certainly found is that by as that relationship grows, I'm starting to get as much from the coach that I'm supposed to be mentoring as they are from me. So just a few personal thoughts on mentorship. So personally, I really believe in the knowledge of crowds. Whenever we're in a setting, even a setting like this, there's much more knowledge in this group than I could ever possibly have. And I think certainly as a coach, once you start to realize that there are things that you can pick up in different areas, then you become a better coach. So I certainly always feel that, if I'm in a room of people, I'm not the smartest person in the room, not by a long way. But I think if you're able to recognize that, it gives you an opportunity to learn from people. So there's always more knowledge in the room, in the group, than there is at the front of it. And I also think that we can learn something from pretty much everybody, even if it's learning what doesn't work. And of course, learning what doesn't work is just as valuable as learning what does work, because it stops you going in that wrong direction and wasting time and energy going down a one-way street, so to speak. So in terms of my mentorship experiences, just wanted to share a few, and maybe a few other people could do that. So not all my experiences were positive, and I think the problem for me is that I picked up some negative traits from some of the people who I was being mentored by, and there were times when I almost became a clone of the coach that I was being mentored by, because I just felt that they were such a good coach and it was the right direction for me to go in, but I wasn't able to say the things that they were able to say and get away with it, because I was learning. I was younger. I didn't have the track record. I didn't have the experience that those coaches had. I didn't have the certification. So I made a number of poor choices and errors just because I felt that I was maybe someone else. I was trying to be the coach that was mentoring me, rather than being the coach that I wanted to be. And that took me some time. So it took me some time to figure out what I wanted from some of these relationships, and sometimes those relationships had kind of failed. And I can think of times when I was being given really good information and I wasn't listening because I didn't think the person talking to me could help about that. So I think one of the things that I always try to do in this, when I find myself in this mentorship process, is I'm just trying to stop people make the same mistakes that I made. If I can help people, not make an error that I have made, then I feel that's probably the best way that I can help them in the moment there. And certainly a lot of times I would have liked to have reacted differently to information that I was given. So certainly there were times when I wasn't in the learner mindset and I wasn't prepared to take things on board. And it slowed down my development. It really didn't help me. But I did have a lot of positive experiences with coaches that have mentored me, not just people that have mentored me in terms of soccer coaching, but also people that have mentored me in other areas. So I always look at this and think that there were lots of good bits of information that I ignored at the time, and I sometimes wonder what directions I might have gone in. So just some personal thoughts there, and then just some questions that I have about mentoring, and it would be great to hear some people's opinions of these. So obviously, I'm always wondering if that old organic mentoring model is more successful than this new assigned model that we sometimes have to use. And of course, we have to recognize that if we're pairing people together, we are going to make some errors. So if what are we going to do about that? Are we going to change people? Are we going to move people around? Are we going to try to find different relationships for people to be involved in? So I asked this question earlier. I'm going to ask it from a slightly different context now. If you're trying to help coaches by mentoring them and they're not getting benefit from this type of relationship, then I question whether they should be involved in your programs. at times I was very close to being this type of coach. So I know that people do sometimes feel as if, you know, that they're not ready to learn. So I think that there are coaches that are not ready to learn, not in that learner mindset. And if it's not time for them, it's not time for them. And if you push them too hard to jump into some mentor-mentee relationship, it's simply just going to fail. So can we select mentors and be confident that it will work? Well, probably not. The key here is to try to see if you can pair people together or find someone that you want to work with, but make sure that you're always assessing that relationship and reflecting on what's happening. Who drives the relationship? Is it better to have the mentor push, or is it better to have the mentee push? Again, I don't think there's a simple answer to that. But I think if you can answer that question, you'll it will help that relationship. And then, can we measure the success and failure of mentorship? It's probably a difficult question to ask, because I think it's a difficult question to answer. But I think the last couple of questions I have are more around running our own programs. Can we put a value on mentoring? Is there a dollar value that we can put on, you know, this mentorship process of trying to develop coaches? We know there's a dollar value on certification. We know there's a dollar value on education. Should we as technical leaders in the sport be putting a dollar value on the mentorship process? And if we can, where does that go in the budget? Right? These are questions that I think are really specific to to people who are leading technical programs. And then kind of the last question here is, where does mentorship fit within your club's technical plan? We talk about education, continued education, certification, development, professional development, but where does mentorship fit into your club's technical plan? I think it's challenging to find a place for that, simply because it's difficult to measure mentorship, and it's difficult to define it, and it's almost impossible to formalize it. But there needs to be a place for mentorship within your club's technical plan, because it's as important as coach education and coach certification, because to me it's that missing piece that we can probably provide from our experiences, but we have got to be sold. We've got to be sold on that process. So that was kind of all I had in terms of the presentation. I wanted to try to be 40 minutes, so I feel pretty good about myself there. So if anyone has any questions or anything to share, I would really love to hear that.
Andrew, thank you. I have a question. How important do you put on building a relationship first between the mentor and the mentee, as opposed to forcing the mentorship right away? Because I feel that it's like players, right? We all have different. When we're running a team and working with players, we have players that have all different types of characters and are receptive to new ideas and learning in different ways. Coaches are the same. So I feel that I just want your thoughts on what you think about building the relationship first and then imposing the mentorship mentee, or do you force the mentee mentorship?
Yeah. So as I said, I think traditionally we found our own mentors, didn't we? We would look at coaches that we liked, or coaches that we admired, and you'd try to connect with those people. And I can see pros and cons to that. I think the challenge we have at the moment, Valerio, is time. There's not always that time for people to get to know them. So I think that if you're forced to put people together, and I think you can put people together, but you may need to be involved as a third party in that first discussion. So there's been a couple of times when I've been assigned a coach to mentor, in my work with the Canadian Sports Institute, and really the first conversation has not been about sport. And I have to tell you, I've found it much easier to work with coaches that are not soccer coaches than our soccer coaches, because I had a few more simpler questions to ask them about their sport. So I was quite vulnerable in those situations because I didn't have any idea really about their sport. So I was maybe asking some what they might consider dumb questions, and that seemed to work. So I think I think in a perfect world, if you can put people together that know each other and have had a little bit of experience with each other, then there's a good chance that there's going to be less chopping and changing. I think if you're putting people together for the first time, then you may need to, as a technical leader in your club or in your program, you may need to interject yourself into that first conversation or first meeting, and maybe have to put a few formal rules in place there.
Yeah. We have a question here. Once you've agreed to mentor, does your relationship ever really end with the mentee?
Okay, so that's a great question, and I think I took something out of this presentation yesterday, and because I thought it was I didn't really need it, and it was, do we ever stop mentoring? And I totally agree with the sentiment from that question. I don't think you do. I think that if you build a relationship with a coach, and you build that trust, and it's a successful relationship, then I think there's always that link between you, and certainly for me, I have that link with about 25 other people that I feel if I needed to ask them a question, I could text them or email them, and I know that they would come back with an opinion. Might not be the opinion that I want to hear, but yeah, I think that's key. You build that relationship, and then you're able to build on top of that relationship and go back. And maybe the best part of that mentoring is not in those early stages. It's later on in that relationship.
We have another question. When you speak of generations changing and younger players and coaching being different, does this open the door to young coaches mentoring older coaches on better ways to deal with young players and how they can best be reached or taught?
Absolutely. So I was hoping to be able to share this kind of war story with you around someone younger giving me an example, and stopping me making a mistake. It was my daughter. So I teach a couple of classes at Camosun College here in the sports management program, and my daughter at the time was in her last year at UVic, and I was asking her some questions, and I was telling her what I was doing with my class. I was all excited about what I was going to do, and I come up with this idea of kind of surprising them with quizzes and surprising them with tests and surprising them with all these little things that I would want them to do. And I thought that was a great idea. And when I told my daughter, she just started pulling her hair out and said, Dad, they don't want that. They're fourth year students. They want to graduate. They want to know when the tests are. They want to know when the exam is. They want to know exactly what you want them to do. And just by listening to that, it saved me a lot of headaches and a lot of pain. So certainly there's something to be learned from everyone, and I do think that if you think about the use of technology, I don't know about you, but I think I'm part of that generation where technology changed as I was coaching. So there's things that I still have some challenges with that some of the younger coaches that I've had the opportunity to work with are able to fix in 2 clicks of a button. And that's not just in technology. That is, as that question alludes to, that is in the way to speak to athletes, the way to present yourself to athletes, things that we shouldn't be saying to athletes that maybe 15 years ago were on the table. So absolutely, there's as I said at the start, I'm not sure that the mentor always needs to be older. They may have different experiences that they can bring to the table and different insights.
I guess you have to look at how your organization wants the mentorship program to work, right? Some may want the more experienced coach or person to lead that, and some may want to focus on the younger coaches that are able to deal with the changes, right? Because even if you look at our coaching education program here in Canada, it's changed a lot in the last 20 years, where they're now, it's more age and age appropriate and more how to deal with them, especially when they're younger, right? And I think the mentorship, I think you need to look at how you want your mentorship program to work as a club. I guess another personal question would be, Andrew, how would you deal with a situation where you have a mentor and a mentee that just don't get along?
Yeah, I think, and you just have to make a change, because as in coaching, we make poor decisions in our coaching. We make errors in the game. We make errors in training sessions. We have to recognize that we might just make errors of judgment in putting people together. There's nothing wrong in admitting that you've made a mistake and you need to change things. It's when you try to push and push and push, I think that error just gets compounded. So you just got to step back and reflect and change and move on.
We have another question from the group. Does the push in transformational coaching allow for the players to become mentees to their coach?
Yeah, I believe it does. I mean, I think the transformational leadership and that transformational coaching, when I think about that, I think about, to me, it's about reflection. It's about being able to look at a situation and take the personalities and take the emotions out of it, and allow other people sometimes to drive the bus. There's different styles of leadership, isn't there? And I find as I'm getting older, I feel I'm more into this style of servant leadership, where, what can I do to help you? What do you need from me? How are we going to get to where we want to get to? As opposed to maybe 15 years ago, okay, this is where we're going, this is when we're going, and this is how we're going. And that thinking, that style, I don't believe works with it doesn't work with our athletes, and it doesn't work with the younger coaches that are coming through. I've just been involved with a C license in BC, and we've done everything online, and it's really been a positive experience for me, because I got to know the coaches a little bit better. And my approach has been from start to finish here is, what do you need from me? Okay, how can I help? Where do you think you might have a gap, and how do you want me to help you fill it? And I think that type of language is the language that we need to be using, with our athletes, with the players, but also with our coaches.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes listening to what they want and what their needs are will help you to better mentor them.
Yeah, and I think that there's been a couple of situations recently where we've seen coaches that have lost their jobs and that have had to move on because of their perceived style. And I think that the change in coaching that I have seen is, it's no longer about where the coach wants to take the group. It's about how do we get the group to where the group want to go. And I think if you can get players to set goals, set targets, set behaviors, and you can get coaches involved in that process, then maybe that's not part of mentoring, but that, in my experience, you'll have a better time trying to get to where you want to get to. If you can't collaborate with people, then you're going to have a tough time.
I think that part is part of mentoring, because in order for you to mentor someone and help someone, you have to understand what they want and where do they want to be.
Yeah.
Right. So if you don't ask those kind of questions, if you don't try to draw that kind of information out of them, you may be mentoring them in a position where they're not interested.
Yes. Yeah. And I think another question that I would ask is, what are you prepared to do to get there? And I think that is once you find out what everybody's bringing to the table, so to speak, then you can start to plan to get to where you want to be.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it, Andrew. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. The presentation was quite interesting and gave a lot of good information out there. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Yes, thank you, and thanks to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Bye-bye.
Bye.